All right, hello and welcome to Let's Talk Trash, addressing floatable pollution in the Bronx and East Harlem of New York City. My name is Sarah Powell. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the ambassador for the Bronx and Harlem Rivers Urban Waters Federal Partnership. One of the ways our partnership works to protect, restore, and revitalize the Bronx and Harlem Rivers and their watersheds is by quantifying and reducing pollution sources and engaging local communities in stewardship. It's my honor today to kick off this workshop where 4 key members of our partnership will be talking about the ways that their organizations work to understand the amount and sources of floatable trash pollution in the Bronx and Harlem River watersheds. To begin, we're going to hear from Rosanna De Silva, the Water Quality Manager for the New York, New Jersey Harbor and Estuary Program. After Rosanna, we're going to have John Butler. He's the Program Director for Restoration and Stewardship from the Van Cortlandt Park Alliance, followed by Jackie Wu, Randall's Island Park Alliance's Park is Lab Research Coordinator, and last but not least, Christian Murphy, Ecology Coordinator for the Bronx River Alliance. After their presentations, we have reserved a little bit of time for question and answer and some discussion, a little trash talk, if you will. And while we know it's not quite the same as being together in person as we all wish we could be, we hope you will find that part informative. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Rosanna.
Thank you, Sarah. So hello, everyone. My name is Rosanna De Silva, and I use she, her pronouns. I am the Water Quality Manager for the Hudson River Foundation and the New York, New Jersey Harbor Estuary Program, commonly referred to as HAP. We are one of the nation's 28 estuaries of national significance, and our program helps bring together diverse stakeholders, including the panelists here today, as well as scientists, citizens, and policymakers to work towards the goal of fishable, swimmable waterways for people and wildlife called for by the Clean Water Act. Next, please. So I want to acknowledge the Munsee Lenape lands that I reside on and also recognize the complex history and the many indigenous peoples of the past and present residing in the Harbor Estuary region. It is one of the biggest public resources in the nation's largest and most densely developed metropolitan area. And the geography extends from the watersheds of the Hudson River and Estuary with the northern boundary of Troy Dam near Albany, New York, and the southern boundary of the Sandy Hook Rockaway Point Transect. Next, please. And because of our common challenges and opportunities, our efforts are focused in the saline tidal waters of the estuary just south of the Mario Cuomo Tappan Zee Bridge. And today we'll be focusing on the Bronx to Harlem River watersheds shown here in the black box. Next slide. To make a comprehensive conservation and management plan, or commonly referred to as CCMP, more accessible to the public, we separated out our core documents such as our 2017-2002 action agenda for our partners and the public to learn about our goals and objectives. The action agenda describes our 5 long-term generational goals and the specific 17 objectives and 40 actions that HAP and our partners will address. Next, please. And we also describe our key indicators of estuarine health and the latest environmental trends in our 2018 State of the Estuary report. And as you can see, water quality improvement in the Harbor Estuary is the biggest success story yet. Focusing on the marine debris for this discussion, the short-term and long-term trends that we're seeing does show that conditions are improving over time. We're seeing that there's less garbage floating in the water and along the shoreline than there was 20 years ago. Next. And so in terms of floatable debris, we have a number of skimming programs in our region. One of the largest skimming programs is operated by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, as well as a program run by the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. And they're showing a downward trend in floatable debris collected. Some of the decrease in floatable debris may be due to stricter permit requirements and efforts by municipalities and utilities to install catch basin inserts or netting systems on their stormwater outfalls. But there are a few complicating factors in determining this trend. Some of this reduction may be attributed to the removal of heavier than normal debris, such as derelict piers in the earlier part of the monitoring program. And there's also been recently just an increase in stewardship efforts, including those by our panelists today, which may also affect the amount of debris collected by these agencies in general. Next, please. And so the most robust collection effort by the New Jersey Clean Shores program is showing a statistically significant decline in debris on beaches, as well as the American Littoral Society's New York State Beach Cleanup Program. And when the metric of volunteers is included, as you can see on the left-hand side, the metric of the data is showing that same downward trend. And so these strong trends indicate that there has been less garbage on the shorelines over time. Next, please. And so recognizing that there is a downward trend, we still recognize that there's still more for us to do here in reducing marine debris and floatable debris in the estuary. And so back in 2017, HEP had started working on this initiative called Stopping Trash Where It Starts, moving around in different portions of our upper watersheds. And so ultimately, this project, and just showcasing the Bronx and the Harlem River watersheds here and the sites that we were focusing on. But ultimately, the project worked to provide data in the right of way, right? So like from property line to the end of the sidewalk, and then 1 foot into the street or equivalent to the catch basin, to really just better understand the most prominent sources and type of litter that we're seeing in the streets. And this allows for us to have more direct pollution prevention measures that can be targeted by material or directly to municipalities and or key stakeholders. Next slide. And so I won't steal the thunder of any of these panelists. I'll just kind of give a holistic view of what the data that we saw from these groups together. And so of the 36 surveys across those 18 sites that were conducted, we found a total of 17,843 items that were counted, weighing in at a total of 185 pounds at a total volume of 243 gallons. And 66.7% of all those numbers were floatable materials. What we saw was cigarette butts was the most commonly or most numerous presented in those counts, followed by food and drink related businesses. Next, please. And so while the remaining panelists will go further into detail about their findings, what I do want to share is that those numbers are not very different than what we've seen in our New Jersey watersheds that we had done the same study in, as well as some of the national beach cleanup programs run by EPA. So this is not untypical. Food and drink related items are the most numerous that we're seeing, and cigarette butts as well. And so the data really just tells us that there's more that we can be doing to address marine debris, and we'll continue to work together to identify innovative solutions to this issue in our estuary. So thank you, and I will take it, I guess, John.
Thanks, Rosanna. So like Sarah said, my name is John Butler. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the program director for restoration and stewardship at the Van Cortlandt Park Alliance. And the Van Cortlandt Park Alliance we are located up in the northwestern Bronx. We support the New York City Parks Department and the recreational, ecological, and historical values of Van Cortlandt Park. And just to note a little bit about Van Cortlandt Park, it is a 1,146 acre city park with almost 2/3 of that area being forested lands. So this first area, I just wanted to show a little bit of the location of where we're talking about. So you can see in that locator map, we're located far northwest. The northern portion of Van Cortlandt Park actually borders Yonkers, which is a southern city in Westchester County. And today we'll be talking about Tibbetts Brook, which is the freshwater waterway that runs directly through Van Cortlandt Park. So in this map, you can see the brook is about 4 miles in length, and it starts in Yonkers and heads south through Van Cortlandt Park. There's 3 sites where there's kind of ponded up systems in it, but for the most part, it runs pretty freeform all the way through, and then enters down at this. This is a map of our water quality monitoring sites. So down at site I is actually the southern region of Tibbetts Brook, and the brook enters the New York City sewer system there, and it's a combined sewer system. So on a dry day, it'll end up heading towards Ward Island's water treatment plant, which is located right on Reynolds Island, which you'll hear a little bit more from Jackie about. And so, yeah, we ended up starting our trash monitoring programming alongside Rosanna and the Stopping Trash Where It Starts program. So we'll get into this on the next slide. So in this on this map, you can see we had 6 locations for this program where we had a few volunteers come out to assist us in monitoring for street debris. And so we went along these couple blocks. All of them were located in Yonkers, and on the map they are the kind of purple strips. And these 6 sites were picked as locations for as this floatable debris or any debris on the street would be able to make its way towards Tibbetts Brook. So most of them are right by the brook or close by storm drains or some kind of tributary to the brook. And the big thing to note here is really, and this was all done in 2018, is really the numbers of debris that we found at each location. So just kind of starting on the top left, you can see this location that's actually located on a higher up in the hill, had a much smaller number of debris in it, and most of the debris was kind of paper and plastic debris, and some kind of composite of plastic and paper together was the majority of where that debris was coming from. But then if you look at these locations that are further south, so the ones that are on the left-hand side that are the second and third graph down, or down on the lower right graph, you can see the values of the number of street debris that we collected in those locations. And so for the most part, a lot of it was plastic debris. So we collected a lot of plastic bottles and fragments of plastic that might have come off of cars, and then also composite materials, which ended up being a lot of kind of food storage debris as well. And so this was kind of our, as the organization that's helping with maintenance and management of Van Cortlandt Park in the downstream system, we wanted to determine kind of where this trash was coming from, how it was getting into Tibbetts Brook, and if we could make any solutions. So our next kind of our first solution, and we're really, since we only started this a couple of years ago, our first solution was actually a trash boom installation. And so kind of going back to our water monitoring map, right at site E, which is the border of Van Cortlandt Park and Yonkers, we ended up putting a debris boom right in the middle of the stream, and we end up maintaining that boom every at the least every 2 weeks. Sometimes we're able to get it every week, and this helps us with really just any debris that's floating and coming downstream. So I have a couple other pictures on the next slide that show a little bit of a better view of it. So this is looking upstream, and the you can see the trash boom. The stream is very small. It doesn't have that great of a flow. However, it does collect a fair amount of trash every week. And you can see kind of within this, it's a lot of smaller stuff. We do have some plastic cups and bottles and styrofoam, but for the most part, we're really using nets to collect all of that debris out of the stream, and then we're sorting it. Next slide, please. So I kind of hope this works. Sarah, you can click on the picture or the video. And so this is my colleague, Sarah, and she is actually sorting through some of the debris on a very cold day this past winter. And we start doing it by hand, really just going through and sorting it by kind of what the debris is made out of. So whether it's a plastic material, whether it's metal, whether it's styrofoam, and this helps us just kind of identify and get quantify how much debris is actually entering Tibbetts Brook, and maybe give us an idea as to where this debris is also coming from. So we do keep an eye out for if there's anything like anything labeled But for the most part, we're really just trying to catalog the amount of trash and see if there's a change over time. Next slide. And this is really just a very shortened data, since we have one trash boom, and you can see the different types of debris that we collect. Most of what we collect is styrofoam. About 83% of the concentration of debris that we collect ends up being styrofoam material. And our next steps in this is really to find out where the styrofoam is coming from. When we did the Stopping Trash Where It Starts surveys on the street, we were not finding quite as much styrofoam as we are in the brook. And so we want to find if there is kind of in the portion of manufacturing along the brook, the manufacturing district, we're able to determine if there's some type of runoff from one of those facilities that we may be able to contact them and work with them on reducing that. Or is it mostly coming off of the highway, which we have the Sawmill Parkway runs directly next to Tibbetts Brook as well. And so most of the styrofoam may be just coming right off of the highway and right into the brook, and not really entering our from the streets, from other streets. Next slide, please. Another program that we just started, and this isn't solely focused on our waterway, but it was a way for us to be able to maintain the trash loads happening within Van Cortlandt Park, is actually to get volunteers out onto the trails in the park and start to collect trash at a larger rate than what we had been before. So this map actually just shows all of the hiking trail, or the nature trails that are in Van Cortlandt Park, which is, there are a lot. There's actually over 20 miles of hiking trails in the park, and you can see all of them in the orange and purple on this map. What I viewed here is that we started this program called the Vital Volunteers Litter Patrol. And so what the Litter Patrol does is they become trained on how to collect and report trash safely within the park, and then they are given a designated trail to maintain. And so they head out at least once a month. We found that most of our volunteers head out on a weekly basis to clear trash off of their designated trail. And then they report all that data back to us. And this allows for, the park really is a big bowl. So anything that it does end up on the trail, if it's never picked up, it's going to find its way towards Tibbetts Brook anyway. So we actually are really shooting to try to reduce this trash both in the park, but also within the brook itself. And so we've trained 42 individuals that are kind of in the program right now. And we started this program back in August of 2020. And so far these 42 folks have visited their sites 340 times. Some of them have just started this past month, so they've only visited their site once or twice. But since then, they have estimated removing over 5,150 pounds of trash from within the park. And this is just phenomenal, and something that our small staff and the New York City Parks staff that we have in Van Cortlandt Park just wouldn't be able to maintain without them. So the sites on this map, all the trails that are in orange are sites that are covered by current litter patrol volunteers, and then all the trails that are in purple are sites that we do not yet have litter patrol for, and that we're working towards getting some more volunteers to cover. Next slide, please. And this is just a few pictures of some of our litter patrol. So I made them take selfies while they were out there, or just have their partner take a picture of them. So we gave them these bright orange or bright green shirts to really stand out. And they are really active in the park. So it's been a wonderful program, and a great way to reduce the trash from being in the park and then also entering Tibbetts Brook. Next slide, please. And that's all I have today. There's just a cool picture of a brown bullhead that we found in Van Cortlandt Lake, which is the open pond on Tibbetts Brook, and that's really why we do all of this work, is for the amazing wildlife that that live in these waterways, but then also for us to recreate and enjoy as well. So I'm going to pass it over to Jackie, who's next up. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, John. I'm Jackie Wu. I am the Park as Lab Research Coordinator at Reynolds Island Park Alliance. Reynolds Island Park Alliance is a partnership with New York City Parks that helps sustain, maintain, develop, and programs Reynolds Island Park to support the well-being of all New Yorkers. And so if I could have the next slide, please. So Reynolds Island Park, Reynolds Island is located, we like to say, in the center of New York City. We are to the east of Manhattan. We are west of Astoria, Queens, and south of the South Bronx. And so also, as the name suggests, we are surrounded by water on all sides. We have the Harlem River, the East River, and the Bronx Kill to the north. And so any trash that ends up on the island will eventually find its way to the waterways. And so we're really interested in making sure we prevent that from happening, especially because, if I could have the next slide, a lot of the communities around us, East Harlem, South Bronx especially, are areas where there are not that many open parks and spaces for the residents to go to. And so, especially during last year, during the pandemic, we realized that our visitor count skyrocketed. It went up by 50% than compared to a normal summer that we would have. And so a lot of people are using Randall's Island as a place to go for sports when it was allowed. But even when it wasn't, a lot of our soccer fields, our baseball fields kind of flexed and became these picnicking areas. And so we want to make sure that people who are coming to the island are having a fun time without all of this trash that may accumulate throughout the time. And so our marine debris program kind of falls under two umbrellas: our volunteer program and also our Park as Lab program. And so if I could have the next slide. We have 4 main sites that we collect trash from. We do try to hit all of the island, but it is a fairly large island, and so we focus mostly on areas where it's important habitat, such as our, to the north, the Bronx Kill Salt Marsh. In the middle is our freshwater wetland, and then kind of that divot where the island turns in a little is our Little Hellgate Salt Marsh. But also on that western shoreline is the Harlem River Pathway and picnic area, which we found to be a very popular location for visitors to the island. And so these are our 4 main sites. And if I could have the next slide. The way we collect our trash is through kind of 2 bubbles. We either have volunteers who come out for some of the larger events, such as Riverkeeper Sweep, International Coastal Cleanup, or Earth Day Cleanup, where we have over 20 people come in and split them up across all of these sites to help us collect the trash. Or we also have our weekly volunteers, who are a smaller group of people, but very dedicated, who also come out, and each week we'll pick a different site where they'll come and collect the trash and document it. And so we, for example, at the freshwater wetland, also have a train net that we try to get to at least once a season, though depending on time and people power isn't always feasible. But the freshwater wetland is where a lot of the water on the Randall's Island drains through, and so that trash net really collects a lot of the trash that is in the center of the islands, whereas the Bronx Kill and the Little Hellgate Salt Marsh are kind of the ones that collect all of the trash that goes through the waterways. And so we have either data sheets provided during these larger events or data sheets that we have created ourselves based off of Bronx River Alliance's data sheets, just so that we can be make sure that our data that we're collecting is comparable to other organizations who are doing the same work. And if I could have the next slide. And that all really helps feed into the Park as Lab program, which was the idea of doing urban ecology for the people, by the people. We're really interested in making sure that we are answering questions our community is interested in. And so this is done through community science, through environmental monitoring, making sure that we provide STEM career pathways, and just doing urban ecology in general. And so the idea is, next slide, please, that all of the data that we collect either through the bigger events or our weekly volunteer events is cleaned and shared with our community. And so if you go onto the Park as Lab webpage on the Reynolds Island website, you can find this data repository, which hosts all of the data we collect. So all of our marine debris data, our surveys for fish diversity, pollinator monitoring, harbor herons, etc. All of the data, all of the presentations that come from the data are shared on this data repository. And this allows anybody interested in what we're doing to be able to utilize all of this information. And next slide, please. This was really helpful in 2020 and also 2021 when students and Board of Ed weren't allowed to have, or earlier on, we're not allowed to have in-person internships, but they still wanted to do impactful work. And so what we were able to do is offer all of this data that we've been collecting since 2018, 2019, 2020, some of our monitoring programs even long before that, and allow them to kind of develop their own questions that they were interested in answering and taking the data to answer these questions. So for example, one student has been able to take all of our marine debris data and kind of look through that. And she has been helping us answer some questions such as, will 2020, 2021 data look different now that so many more people are coming to the island and there's so much, perhaps an increase of using single-use plastics again and plastic bags now that people were taking out lunches and not sitting in restaurants, but maybe bringing it to Reynolds Island and eating it there, having a picnic, kind of where you're socially distanced from everybody else? Or will we see an increase in PPE? So far, it seems like there is a small bump, but not that huge jump that we were thinking would happen. Plastics, again, seems to be the dominant force through all the years, but it'd be interesting to see if that changes, if that is kind of just for Little Hellgate Salt Marsh, or if down the line there are other places that we should start sampling because people find their own special place on Reynolds Island that we haven't thought of as a perfect picnic spot. But when 2021 rolls around and you want to be still far away from everybody, you kind of go off the beaten path and find your own location. And so it's really interesting to be able to have all of this data that we've been collecting and have everybody come in with their own questions that they want to answer that we might not have thought about before, but luckily we have all the data for them. If I could have the next slide. That is all I had to share. If you have any questions about either of our marine debris or Park as Lab or Reynolds Island in general, here's the information, but I will pass it off now to Christian, who is the Ecology Coordinator at the Bronx River Alliance. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. So yeah, my name is Christian Murphy. I use pronouns he, him. I am the Ecology Coordinator for the Bronx River Alliance, and today I'm just going to be talking a little bit about one of our biggest and most successful volunteer engagement programs, which is called Project Waste, and I'll get into that in a second. The Bronx River Alliance is a 501c3. We have a partnership with the New York City Parks Department, and this allows us to get a lot of resources and really forward the mission of the organization. And our mission is to restore and protect the Bronx River so that it can be a healthy, ecological, recreational, educational, and economic resource for the communities through which it flows. And so the Bronx River has come a long way from the olden days. That first picture on the first slide was from the West Farms Rapids. And basically the idea is that, as beautiful as that picture is, it's just a small snapshot of the river. And the goal is to one day have as much of the river as possible to be that beautiful. And so here's some background on the Bronx River. The Bronx River is a 23-mile-long river. Its headwaters are near the Kensico Dam near White Plains, New York. And it runs south through Westchester County and then through the Bronx, and then empties out into the East River and the Long Island Sound. The Bronx River is New York City's only freshwater river. Its tidal limit is only 3 miles up from the mouth. And so while there are other freshwater rivers that do empty through New York City, they are brackish by the time they enter the Bronx. And so this means that the Bronx River is quite a unique habitat. And so it's really worth all the time and effort to to keep it clean and healthy. This image here on the right is from the 1940s. This is from the South Bronx. There was a concrete plant there. And so this was kind of a typical sort of appearance for the Bronx River. It was industrial. We used it as a highway to transport materials. It was part of our transportation infrastructure, and it wasn't really a part of our natural landscape the way that we would think of rivers nowadays. And so through a lot of collaborations, funding, and backbreaking labor, we've been able to transform the Bronx River from that transportation corridor into an ecological corridor. However, as you can see by this sort of apocalyptic looking picture here, we do still have some pretty significant water quality issues. And I should mention that the Bronx River doesn't always look like this. This tends to happen when we have trees come down that obstructs the flow of the channel for a couple of weeks if we can't access this. So this is actually from the Bronx Zoo. And it's kind of tricky to get into this location of the river to remove blockages. And so this is what happens when you obstruct the flow of water. We get this huge influx of floatable waste just kind of piled up on top. And so, next slide, please. So here's the assumption. This is the narrative that's been put on the Bronx for many, many years, basically in the entire time that the Bronx has existed. The narrative is that the Bronx is dirty, and that's why the Bronx River is dirty. And so why we see all this trash in the water is because the people of the Bronx don't care about their surroundings. They don't take care of their environment, and they're the ones that are throwing trash, and that's what's ending up in the river and choking the wildlife. And this is a pretty common narrative, right? We see this in a lot of urban, areas around the world. But at the Bronx River Alliance, we didn't think this was true. As you can see, only 1/3 of the river actually flows through the Bronx. And while there's a higher population density in the Bronx, most people don't even know where the river is, and they rarely actually get to see it in person. There's a trash boom down at Concrete Plant Park, which is maintained by the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, but that's the very bottom of the river, essentially. And so what we decided to do is in 2016, the Bronx River Alliance installed a trash boom at Muskrat Cove. This is a park that borders the county border with Westchester. And so anything caught in that trash boom at Muskrat Cove Park is coming down from Westchester. It's not actually coming from within the Bronx itself. And so in this way, we were able to see, not only are we obstructing and removing trash that's entering the river, but there's a twofold benefit. We also get to see what's coming from Westchester itself. And so this will help, hopefully, to shift that narrative that the Bronx is what's destroying the river. And it turned out that this was an extraordinarily successful volunteer engagement program. To date, we've engaged more than 3,500 students, local residents, and corporate volunteers. And they often ask for this program by name when they're trying to volunteer with us. We've removed more than 215,000 individual trash items, which amounts to about 7 tons of floatable trash from the river. And so this is a huge dent in the pollution. But if you go to the next page, this is our data sheet. And so as we are collecting the trash and moving it into trash bags, there are designated data counters, and they tally every single item as much as possible that actually comes out of the water. And so you'll notice that some of these are quite specific, including Nerf dart and golf ball. And a lot of these are items that we tend to see over and over again. And so they've made it onto the data sheet because of how likely they are to be encountered. And so what this does is it gives us a really high quality data set for the floatable waste that comes out of the river. And so this helps us to sort of look at where this trash might be coming from, where we could start to do targeted outreach to try to stem that flow. So what you'll notice here, and I'm not necessarily going to go into exactly the breakdown of these pie charts, but you'll notice that the upper pie charts are definitely very purple and very large. And that sort of changes color and size as you go downstream. This is for the years 2016 through 2019. And that purple color is styrofoam. And so this is sort of a common theme here in the Bronx, that there's a lot of styrofoam pollution in our watersheds. It's quite significant. And if you go further down, you'll notice that that portion of styrofoam decreases. And so it looks like that there is some sort of source of styrofoam in the upper watershed, at least north of the Bronx. And we also see that, The boom in Concrete Plant Park does collect a lot of woody debris. And so a lot of the volume that the city reports from the Bronx River is actually, tree branches and organic material, and it's not actually, plastic and things like that. And so through some of our surveys, we found that there's oftentimes more trash that comes from the upper river than what actually comes from the Bronx. And so this helps to shift that narrative that the Bronx is dirty, because in fact, the Bronx is not contributing too much to the pollution in the river. Let's go to the next slide. This was, we explored this further in 2019 when a PhD student from New Jersey approached us, and she was developing a protocol as she was writing her thesis. And it was looking at street trash as it relates to floatable waste in waterways. And so we were able to survey streets that were adjacent to trash booms. Westchester Parks Foundation had installed 2 trash booms by this point in White Plains and Tuckahoe. White Plains is a city in sort of mid-Westchester, and Tuckahoe is a small town, sort of the middle of the county. And so what we were able to do with this graduate student was actually survey streets on 800-meter transects above and below each boom. And so what we could do is look at, using the same protocol, using the same data sheets, but actually sift through the trash on the sidewalks and see how they compare to what's actually in the river. And so we can get a picture of, okay, well, if people are throwing things on the street and it's passing through storm drains in the MS4 system, it's going to wash up into the river. That makes sense. If that's what we see in the data, then we'll know that's where the trash is coming from. And what we found actually sort of surprised us. Next slide, please. The data didn't line up very much at all. We didn't really see very much styrofoam at all on the streets. And we saw a significant amount of styrofoam coming from the trash booms in Westchester, even up at the headwaters. So that upper boom near White Plains, almost, I think that's what, 80-something% of the trash moved from that boom during the period of the survey was styrofoam. And it continues to be the majority going down through to the Bronx. And so what this tells us is that it's unlikely that styrofoam is coming from the sidewalk. It's unlikely that people are throwing styrofoam on the street. It's likely that there's some point sources of styrofoam in a couple different places along the river. And that really begs our investigation, because as we know, styrofoam breaks down and it looks like food to wildlife, especially because we have a lot of filter feeding fish like the alewife herring. They will just eat that up. And so that's a huge environmental issue. It's also an environmental justice issue because a lot of this waste collects down in our communities in the South Bronx. And so while community members in Westchester may not see this pollution in their parks and along their waterfronts, we see it down here in the Bronx. And so that's a huge environmental justice issue. It's part of the reason why we get so much engagement from our volunteers and students and community members. Because they are passionate about that issue. They are passionate about making a difference and, cleaning up an area that they really care about. Next slide, please. So this is the future. This is what we're hoping that we can eventually get to. This is Mr. Trash Wheel. He is a trash wheel that I believe lives in Baltimore. And the people who maintain Mr. Trash Wheel are able to get a pretty good look at what he eats from the river. And so if we were able to get a trash wheel in the Bronx River, we could do more high-def sort of analyses of what's coming out of that lower trash boom. And this would help us to see, in a more high-def way, what trash is entering the Bronx River from the Bronx itself. Because right now we only have pictures of what comes down from Westchester County north of the county border. And so this would just help us to maybe figure out how we could do targeted outreach and how we could get students and volunteers involved in that kind of advocacy for their the local environment. Next slide. Yeah, so that's what I have to share. Project Waste is highly successful, and I think it's a good model for other organizations to model. And yeah, if you have any questions, please reach out to me or my supervisor, Michelle. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Christian, and all of you. That was a really great series of presentations. Want to dive into a little Q&A, and I just wanted to note, working with all of you, I knew some of that, but not all of that, so thank you for that. And I think it's really interesting that particularly between Tibbetts Brook and the Bronx River, both of you are seeing styrofoam from Westchester as a big problem. And it was interesting to me that not as much down on Reynolds Island, probably because you guys are cleaning it before it reaches you guys. But I guess, so that's my kind of first question. And Christian, you talked about it a little bit, but what do you all think is, not to leave you out on this one, Jackie, I've got another question. But what do you think, is the next step on working with Westchester, or, combining your data and pooling your resources to try to make strides on this, either between your two organizations or even Rosanna of help, continuing their regional work? I guess I'm just curious what everyone's thoughts are on next steps on the styrofoam front.
I can jump in right now. So we are looking at what we're calling problematic outfalls, or outfalls under consent order, along the Bronx River in particular. In the MS4 system, so this is the municipal separate storm sewer system, and that's what Westchester uses to manage its stormwater and its sewage pollution. We believe that a lot of these outfalls don't have adequate capture devices or structures. And so whatever's washing in from the sidewalk is not being collected. It's just going to flow freely into the river. We know that there's issues because we get a lot of sewage pollution. We see a lot of bacterial spikes in Westchester. We believe that those are probably related. And so what we're looking at here is where we find outfalls that are not adequately capturing larger debris, that we can do outreach to those municipalities, and we can maybe even get students to do letter writing campaigns and talk to those elected officials to see if we can find ways to repair that infrastructure. And that might help to stop a lot of that pollution from coming in.
And just being a much smaller water body for Tibbetts Brook, we're doing a similar thing. We've actually kind of narrowed down and have a few stormwater outfalls that are kind of our problem sources, and it's much easier for us to narrow them down because there aren't so many. So I'm in pretty regular contact with the folks from both Westchester Parks Foundation as well as the DEC in that region, to really figure out some of the other issues that might be going on within some of those stormwater drains. But I think for us, it's really looking at a few of these manufacturing sites that are along the brook as the potential source for this styrofoam. I think just because we aren't seeing it in the street, and so it doesn't make sense for it to really be coming from the street. So where is it coming from? And there's only a very short strip of manufacturing along Tibbetts Brook. And so I think if we start narrowing down and really looking into what might be happening along that strip, we might be able to have a good communication with those companies that are along there, and possibly change some of their ways to be able to stop that styrofoam from entering the system.
And I think I would just add, from the Harbor Estuaries programs perspective, right? Like we definitely rely on all the panelists here and the good work that their organizations are doing. And, if we can fund portions of it to kind of, to John's point, right? Like understanding, okay, so the street trash isn't the issue. That's not where styrofoam is coming, right? Like this was a gap in the data that we were collecting, right? Like we have data for in the river, but we didn't have data for what was potentially coming in from the streets. So can we narrow that down? Is that the issue? Is that not the issue? And so I think one of the things that we're looking to, do is and be supportive of is, can we find and identify funding sources to really get us to, some of these larger innovation efforts, such as like the Mr. Trash Wheel. I'd love to see a number of them across the estuary. But recognizing that it takes, it's a large investment that that's needed, as well as, operations and maintenance after the installation is completed, right? So there's a lot of discussion, and a lot of work that I'm doing has been trying to understand, what is everyone doing across the estuary, but also across the nation, and is there some best practices that we can come and, share with our partners of like, hey, they were successful in doing this, in terms of their track downs of the materials they were seeing in their waterways, and be that kind of pinpoint to share knowledge across all of the partners in the estuary, because there are a number of organizations doing similar work. So, communication, sharing ideas, and glad to see like a number of partners are using the Bronx River Alliance's data sheet, because then that makes the state of the estuary report so much easier for us to write, because all the data is being collected and analyzed in the same way. So that's that's great.
I have to say, I think it's great that all of your organizations have, multiple years of data prior to this past year plus. Because and Jackie, you talked about this a little bit. I thought it was really interesting that you weren't seeing, at least immediately, crazy spikes in your results from COVID and increased park usage. So I guess I just want to hear from folks a little bit about how you think COVID has, or will continue to impact, has it impacted your findings? Will it continue to impact? What do you think, the impact of COVID and increased park usage has been on your work?
Yeah, so I guess we can start. We actually put in PPE as a category, thinking that it would kind of be the biggest one that we would see, gloves everywhere, masks everywhere, and it hasn't been the case. And I wonder if it's because everybody has been fairly good about, if I'm outside and I see people, I'm keeping my mask on and not taking it off and letting it fly off into the distance. But we do wonder if like the single-use takeout containers, if those are going to start increasing. Just again, even when there aren't sports on the island, it's still large green space. You can still come out, set out, a picnic blanket. And so that's, I think, what we're mostly focusing on right now, to see if there is that increase with people coming out in far larger numbers than we had thought would come to the island. And so we're thinking of maybe adding in more of the picnic areas that we start to survey as well, not just the important habitats, the salt marshes where the water is kind of the one that brings the trash around, but also locations where people are tending to go.
We did experience a spike in trash. We had people give testimonials that there was trash in a lot of our parks. And so we did a big pivot, and a lot of the work that our conservation crews started to do in 2020 was mostly litter sweeps across the river. That probably stopped a lot of it from entering the river itself and spiking our floatable trash data. But definitely with people, stuck at home in quarantine or maybe furloughed from their jobs, they came out to our parks as like a mental health spaces, really. And unfortunately, that really coincided with a huge spike in trash in the grass. So I think a lot of the work was done by our crew to keep that from entering the water. Otherwise, I think it would have ended up in there, and we would have been seeing masks caught in all of our tree branches down by the water's edge and stuff like that.
Yeah, we saw similar, just the wildly increased park usage in Van Cortlandt, which was one of the big reasons why we started the Vital Volunteers Litter Patrol program, was really just to begin to collect that trash. And it was, I think, just starting that program. I think if we started that program in 2019 or 2018, we wouldn't have gotten the feedback as we did with it when we started in 2020. And that was because people were seeing more trash just because of the higher usage of people in the park. And that's not it's actually not and kind of going back to Christian's thought of like his point that the assumption is that here in the Bronx we're dirty and that we throw our trash everywhere. He made that's a great point, because the thing is that, like, even when we saw these issues here in Van Cortlandt Park, where we see this increased trash, it's actually not the folks in the park that are really doing that and really throwing their trash everywhere. They're trying to get it in the trash can. It's actually our chance at getting that trash up and out of here that's and outside of the park to truck it away has really been the strain. And that was because we had a decreased amount of staff because of funding for 2020. So we wanted to engage the community a little bit more and actually have them assist us in removal of all of that debris so that it didn't enter the waterway and actually escape Van Cortlandt Park. We wanted to try and keep it here. And I think it's really just, for me, that mindset of changing from, it's not always just our fault as like a single human for throwing trash on the ground. That really the big issue is kind of the system in general, and all of this like single-use plastics and single-use the styrofoam that we get at everything is really the big concern that we're really kind of fighting against, and that's our battle. It's not the person that might miss the trash can and throw it to the side. It's really these the companies that are really not making sustainable changes.
Great. Thanks. I have one more wrap-up question, unless any of you have thoughts or comments. But just kind of building off what all of you just touched on, each of your organizations has a really robust set of volunteers. Some are, more recently started, but regardless, I was really impressed by all the amount of work and different types of volunteer programming you offer and, have such great engagement with. So I guess for anyone listening to this or tuning in today, that is maybe thinking about either starting to organize a group of volunteers to do this, or just starting to think about how they can organize, put together a trash program for their organization. What is your number one piece of advice or lesson learned from all the work your organization has done that you would give someone that wants to do something similar? You all look very pensive. I'll give you a second to think about it.
We found, especially last year, that social media it's invaluable to the work that we do. Instagram, amazingly, we grew our attendance by like 90% or something last year. It was amazing. And so people were like looking for things to do. They were just looking for things that were distracting. And we were like, well, we've got this program, we do this, and we do this, and this is our data. And people were just like eating it up. And I think that honestly, one of the best ways to do outreach is just to put out all that stuff on social media as much as possible, because people are going to find it and people are going to see it, and people are looking for those kinds of opportunities to do stewardship. And so if you are, you've got a space somewhere that needs to be cleaned up, maybe put up flyers or go to the local library branch, but also engage your members on social media and use like proper hashtags. And it's amazing what can happen.
And we had, I think one thing I was trying to figure out why, or like how we have such a good volunteer core that really comes out. And I mean, I think part of it is that just like the communities that we're in. I think people in the Bronx, people in Manhattan for Reynolds Island, they care, and they care about their community, and that's really helpful. But I was also just like asking my volunteers and did like a very relaxed survey for them as to like, why do you keep coming out? And the big thing is that they continue to be engaged in some way or another, where there's different ways. So trying to keep them engaged and keeping those in the community, not only giving them the opportunity to take charge on their own. So I think such as like the program that we started by designating a hiking trail that one can do on their own time, I think gives a sense of responsibility to that person, but then also just giving opportunities to learn more too. And I think that's something that Christian spoke about too, is and also Jackie, they have all of this data that the volunteers are able to look into, and these awesome staff members that the volunteers can really kick in on it and get a better understanding of the ecology behind it all, and why we're actually doing that. And I think that's a big portion of it. If you have a good leader and you have good opportunities to provide these people, they'll come because people care about their communities.
Agreed, and I think it's also important that not only are you planning for the big events where you can maybe have, well, maybe not now, but 20 to 50 people come out and really have a big day of cleaning, but also looking to those who maybe just come for the weekly events and it's 4 or 5, but they're, 4 or 5 that really want to come out, really continue to come out, and balancing having both those large events and small events, and making sure that at the large and small events, everybody is engaged and really learning more about why they're, okay, cool, we picked up the trash and it's away in a bag now and not going into the water, but why is this important? And I think that helps build that core that continues to come back and then spreads the word for everybody else to also learn of the opportunity.
Yeah, and I think I would just add to what everyone is saying, right? I think if you're going down the path of wanting to start your own, trash pickup or, start tallying, recognize that, you can change your data sheet over time. It's a huge learning curve. Like, you'll end up putting things on the list that wasn't on there, like golf balls and Nerf guns, or I think we also, in even our data sheet, we ended up adding e-cigarettes, right? Because that wasn't an option when we had first created the tally sheet, and then all of a sudden e-cigarettes were a big hit, and you just started seeing all these, composite materials of the e-cigarette being left behind. So I think just, recognize that you can start off with a short data sheet of, just materials, and then if you want to fine tune it, there's always the option of fine tuning it by type and materials, and you can go into so many different ways, but I think just kind of recognizing, are you training your volunteers beforehand to do this work or not? And that should tell you, how in depth that data sheet should look like. But at the end of the day, sharing that data with your volunteers is so important, right? Because it goes beyond the, I feel good, I just collected like 2 bags of trash today to clean my neighborhood, but what happens afterwards, right? I think that is so key to keep people continuously coming back to these programs and continuing volunteering and maybe engaging, expanding our networks of our communities and organizations, right? And connecting to other folks by, the volunteers engaging their friends and their families saying, hey, come out with me this one day. So, I commend everyone on this panel. They do an excellent job in engaging partners and volunteers and community groups, and the work you guys do is tremendous. So I applaud you all.
Yeah, same. Well, that's all I have. I think we're right about time. So I'll just say thank you so much to all of you. Thanks for letting me pepper you with questions. And to everyone tuning in and watching this, I hope you enjoyed it and enjoy the rest of River Rally. So